when we start, I guess, to arrange figures in the void as this, these mass shapes right here, thinking about back a couple of slides ago when we were talking about making a positive space porous. Well, this is sort of the opposite. We are sort of building a positive space by putting in figures right here. So as we start to put figures in, we start to notice a bit of essentially space positivity. It's sort of imposed on the space. It's almost as if these spaces, I'm sorry, these objects, when they are in close proximity to each other, interact perceptually and create a sort of recognizable identity space within between them. So you can definitely like say I am that one test for, I guess, positive space is whether or not you can say I am within that space or I'm without that space. I'm not in that space. If you can say that about a space, then it has space positivity. So that you can say that about this space. But it's also plain to be noted that when you have just an object unto itself, positivity seems to almost kind of exude from that as well, because there is identity around that object. You can be either close to that object, and you can be far, far away from that object. And the farther you get away from that object, the less identity or less connection you have with that object. And so these are all very subjective sort of almost electric fields here, but it's something that is very real, at least in the way that we perceive things. And so you may have noticed as well, but as I put in this fifth figure into the scene, we also start to get some interaction between that and these the four that I originally put in here. So as you can see, this sort of triangular space that sort of feels that there is an identity to that, which is essentially between the single object and the four figures. The same could be true if we put a wall on the upper part of this. So if this is a top down, so essentially as you stand next to that wall, you have a feeling of identity with being in the space of that wall. And this wall as well interacts directly with the objects that are standing near it. So you have sort of this space between being near the wall, between the objects. And so as you can see, sort of mass kind of exudes kind of a positive space aura. And it's almost kind of very much like, a visualization of kind of like magnetism or gravity, I suppose. And, as the player sort of would move through this space, you actually might see the player very much like walk along, and they obviously can't go directly through an object, so they're going to be pushed away from it. They're going to be passing around it, and you sort of might start seeing players follow paths that very much are aligning with these kind of almost magnetic fields. So the point that I guess I'm trying to bring to you is that there's positive and there's negative space. However, it's really, there's a huge spectrum between them, and it's almost kind of like there is no pure negative space or pure positive space, except in theory. In the real world or in our levels, we're going to see sort of this wide spectrum, and it really comes down to is a space leaning towards positive space or is it leaning towards negative space? And as it does, it starts to take on some of these characteristics. So in positive space, distances become more concrete and measurable. You are the distance between you and an object is easy, sort of plain to see, and you can sort of compare that to other objects that are close together as well. But as far as when you're in negative space, the distances start to get larger and unclear, and you sort of lose that relativity. Possibilities are more limited in positive spaces because things are enclosing on you. The boundaries are keeping you from moving beyond them. The shapes sort of impose that on you. In negative space, possibilities are less constrained. You can move as you wish. in positive space, as we were saying before, it's actually kind of one of the characteristics of positive space is that it has identity. You can say, I am near this object, or I'm within these objects that create this sort of room. In negative space, the space sort of blends with the other space, and it's really less identifiable from point to point, which leads us to essentially making it much easier for players to be able to mentally map the shapes of a positive space, because obviously the positive space has shape that's easily understandable, or it should be more easily understandable than more negative space leaning. Another effect of positive space is that players are inclined to linger. We dwell in positive spaces. We live in positive spaces. We're comforted by the boundaries and by the security. In negative space, the players it inclines the player to move. We move through negative spaces. And this comes back to occlusion, which we'll go over a little bit more later. But positive space limits visibility, knowledge to a singular space. But negative space gives high visibility and allows us to be able to have an understanding of how multiple positive spaces might have interdependence. It gives us sort of an overview of space a lot better than positive space.